Welcome into the special Sunday edition. Looking ahead at the Texas-Georgia SEC championship game and what could happen with Texas in the playoffs. What are they playing for coming up on Saturday at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta? I'm Gerry Hamilton, joined by CJ Vogel. I guess the first thing to get out of the way is with the win against A&M, what does it do? It gives Texas the chance to play for the bye or they'll host in the first round of the playoffs. And we'll get to that later on. But that's done with the win over A&M. This isn't Texas loses. If the Texas loses to Georgia, they're going to be on the road. No, those days are over. They're in a great spot for the playoffs now. But before we get to that playoff, we're going to talk about this Texas-Georgia part 2. And CJ, this is very interesting because I don't think Texas is going to get the same Georgia that rolled into Austin in the first half. First 3 quarters of that game. And I don't think Georgia's going to get the same Texas that they rolled into Austin and whipped up on. I think this is going to be a different game. I don't think it's going to be similar. I don't think it's going to look the same as the first game. Kind of what are your first initial thoughts about this rematch? And by the way, what did we say before the season, CJ? The best case scenario of all time would be if Texas played Georgia 3 times this year, because that means you're playing for the national championship. Well, here's part 2 of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually funny sitting here, walking into SEC championship week thinking this could have been a big possibility coming into the year, and yet it is the reality now. And, of course, it's for different reasons. Why, Georgia's kind of stumbled throughout the way. They've looked as vulnerable as we've ever seen a Kirby Smart team since this dynastic run has began. And then Texas has kind of evolved into a different team than we thought they would be at the beginning of the year, right? It was all offense, Quinn Ewers, offensive line, Steve Sarkisian, and instead it's turned into, well, this Texas defense can go toe-to-toe with just about anybody, and we've seen that from the very start. So it's interesting to see how 15 weeks of a college football season changes a team, and to your point, you're going to see an absolutely different look for each team, I think, than what we saw in the middle of the season, specifically with Texas, with the way that they've been running the football. If that shows up against Georgia in the SEC championship game, I think that poses a different challenge than what we saw in Austin previously, because that run game, that complementary football on the offense side of the ball was completely non-existent, and it was swallowed up by Kirby Smart's defense. It'll be interesting, but right now, what's going to be interesting again, Gerry, is going to Atlanta to play Georgia.
Home game for Georgia.
Home game for sure. So that'll be a tough task for the Longhorns. Fortunately, in a dome, Texas will travel a good bit. They'll have a nice ticket allotment, but those adjustments from the earlier season matchup will have to be on display for sure.
I think there's 3 real keys with Georgia that I look at right now that are going to be different than the game in Austin. 1, Carson Beck's playing a better brand of football.
He absolutely is.
I mean, he was bad. He was going through an awful stretch. I actually said he may have been the worst quarterback in the SEC for that stretch because he had so many turnovers. He had 12 turnovers, 12 interceptions. He still has 12 interceptions after the Florida game, or after the Ole Miss game. So those last 3 games, he's playing at a higher level. I think they're leaning on the run game more so than they were to help Carson Beck out. Because going into the Texas game, they were 72% of the time they were in a pass shell on offense. I think that's too high for a Georgia Bulldogs football team. So I think they've kind of corrected that a little bit. The second thing is Nate Frazier's emerged, and boy, will he look fast on the turf in Atlanta. But Trevor Etienne's injured. Where will he be? Will he be back this week? Will he not be back this week? And then Tate Ratledge, the All-America guard, is back in the fold for Georgia, where he just was trying to come back and really couldn't give it a go. So there's 3 key things on offense for Georgia going into this game. But number 1, CJ, for me is the last 3 games is not the same Carson Beck that played in Austin. He's got his confidence back. I think Georgia's helping him more with the run game. So Texas is going to see a different Carson Beck this go-round.
Yeah, they absolutely will be. Unfortunately for Texas, that pass rush has gotten home, right? You had a pair of sacks on Marcel Reed. You contained him in the pocket. You played sound football. You're up to 14 sacks over the last 3 games. So they're finding their groove with Colin Simmons, Trey Moore playing his best brand of football, having sealed the game against Texas A&M with a strip sack. So they're finding confidence there. That's how you counteract that because, again, that Georgia wide receiving group, it's not special. It's not good, even, I would say. They lead the country in drops. They don't find a lot of separation. And when the ball is put in the right spot, there's a lot of questions or even reliability issues on whether or not that play will be converted into positive yards for Georgia. Texas saw that firsthand in Austin earlier this year. I wanted to talk about the flip side of it. Because, Gerry, we just watched Arch Manning play a handful of snaps on the road for the first time as a Texas quarterback, taking road snaps in a package in which he just ran the football. And what did we just watch Georgia and Georgia Tech kind of duke it out with? It was Haynes King running the ball 25 times and having really solid success doing so, right? To have that ability, that dual threat of Arch Manning to drop back to pass. He did get to play a little bit against Georgia, didn't have a whole lot of success, but he did get his feet wet against the Bulldogs earlier this year. And those running packages for Arch, I think, with Sarkisian maybe looking a little bit ahead, knowing that Quinn Ewers won't be 100% the rest of the season with that ankle, but also looking at that Georgia Tech game saying, yeah, we're going to need that running quarterback package against Georgia because they had a whole lot of success with it from the Ramblin' Wreck.
Yeah, you know what's interesting also about this game to that point is Texas defensively only played 55 snaps against A&M because Texas offense controlled the clock and controlled the ball. So while you played a game a day later than Georgia Tech, and then Georgia and Georgia Tech did, you weren't on the field that much defensively. Mm-hmm. That's really good for Texas going into this game. The flip side, Georgia Tech ran 83 plays, not counting penalties. Oof. Georgia was taxed in that game. Georgia Tech had 47 rushing attempts for 260 yards. Okay, and Georgia Tech still had 36 pass attempts, so you were tackling in space with 26 completions. Georgia Tech had 28 first downs or 7 of 15 on third downs. I mean, had the ball for 37 minutes and 11 seconds in that game, CJ. So, yeah. Texas is going to be the fresher defense. I'll tell you the other interesting thing for me in this game is Texas got physically whipped at home in Austin. And now they get to go a second chance to play that same team. In the history of sports, that second time normally goes pretty well for that team who got physically whipped in the first game. There's an extra motivation there. There's an extra, okay, this isn't happening again, right? So Georgia's going to be in for a different fight in this game because Georgia took it too. Yeah, as Mike Tyson, everybody's got to play until they get punched in the face. That's what happened in Austin.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Now Texas is going to have a plan. They already got punched in the face and lost the game. Now they're going to come in with a different mindset. And I think that's going to be huge for Texas in this game, trying to control that line of scrimmage against Georgia. But I want to lead you to this, CJ. All of that doesn't matter if Quinn doesn't play better in the pocket than he did against Georgia in the first game. Because half of those sacks were on him.
Yeah. And half of those sacks resulted in forced fumbles, right? Strip sack fumbles. And, you know, you give Georgia short fields, regardless of what Carson Beck is doing, regardless of what that running game looks like, short fields for anybody in the SEC, you're going to find success more times than not. And Texas defensively has been tremendous at preventing scores when starting drives in their own territory, especially deep in their own territory. We saw one Saturday night against Texas A&M, the block punt. A&M gets ball at the 19. It's a turnover on downs, right? So it's the little things like that that should inspire some confidence in the Texas defense. But to your point, it starts with Quinn Ewers, and that's kind of been what we've seen over the last 4, maybe 5 weeks. The ceiling of this team is dependent upon the play of Quinn Ewers in my eyes. Because the floor we know is very high with this defense. One other point I wanted to bring up, after the Georgia Tech game, I was up home in Dallas. I was talking to my dad, kind of recapping the game, and he goes, you know what? That's probably a good thing that Georgia won that game. I'm asking him why. What do you think about what's the mindset there? And he goes, well, if their only way to get into the college football playoff was to beat Texas, you don't think that they would have pulled out every single stop, every single trick play, every single little detail or nuanced, whatever that could go their direction to beat Texas? I'm thinking, yeah, you're probably right. At 10-2 in the regular season, they have a really good shot at making the playoff. I would put them in right now. Absolutely. No question. This is a luxury, of course. You want the first round bye. You don't necessarily want to play the extra game despite it being at home. So I agreed with them, and I'm on board with it 100% right now that maybe that was a good thing, that game went 8 overtimes, that Georgia won that football game, that they're not pissed off that they lost to their arch rival in a game that they were favored by 20. Now they're in the playoff. Now they're not the desperate dog fighting with its back against the wall 100%.
And you know what Kirby's message is going to be to his team this week? Guys, we win, we get a bye. If we lose, we're going to be playing at Penn State or Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. Georgia's in the playoff, win or lose. If they lose this game, though, we're going to get into this in a second. They're going to be on the road. And where you're going to be on the road, the way this bracket's going to set up, you're going to be somewhere cold. And if you catch the snowy, windy day, man, you hadn't played in that environment before.
No.
And that was big with Texas beating Texas A&M, because if Texas had lost to A&M, I think they kind of got sent north for a first-round game. And then you're sitting there playing in South Bend, Indiana, December 20th, and you have no idea what that weather is going to be. But I'll take a guess and say it wasn't going to be pleasant. So that's the key there for me. I agree with your father. Here's the other thing that's going to be interesting with Sark. He's now playing this one team on his schedule. Maybe Oklahoma to a certain extent, because their linebackers are really good in coverage, that can take away his perimeter game with linebacker speed and size and physicality. So Sark's what is he going to do against Georgia this week? We got a whole week to talk about it, but it starts now. What is he going to do differently against Georgia this time? Because the one thing about the Dogs, was the one team on the schedule that those linebackers could close those angles and close that space extremely quickly in the perimeter passing game, in the screen game and whatnot. And when they hit you, it was with physicality, that speed, bringing the hips, physicality. So, CJ, it's going to be interesting to see how Sark attacks Georgia, because it's going to have to be a little different. You can't go back to this well twice. Not this team athletically at linebacker.
No, certainly not. And I don't want to say it's a silver lining, but in that second half, you did see the ball move for Texas, right? You had the 2 scoring drives that began the second half. Quinn Ewers actually threw for 190 yards, right? Pair of touchdowns. There was some success. Now, how much of that was the result of Georgia saying, hey, we're up 23. We don't need to show everything we have in the playbook. That's kind of the back and forth. But if there's something to build upon for Steve Sarkisian, we found something that worked there. Now, will it work whenever it's good on good, best on best in the first quarter? That's what he's got to, hone in on and make sure that Texas has some sort of consistency and rhythm early on. But to the point, hey, Texas is running the best it's run the football over the last 10 quarters. And I know Georgia's a different animal than what A&M or even Arkansas or Kentucky provide. I'm not denying that, but the way that offensive line is clicking and displacing bodies better than they ever have this season, that should provide some level of comfortability for Sarkisian and his play calling.
Yeah. All right. So that's a little bit on the just looking ahead to the Texas-Georgia game. We're going to close this out today with a look at the playoffs, and we're going to go through kind of the scenario for Texas, we believe. So let's start with the obvious. If Texas wins, they get a bye. Okay. And with that bye, they're either going to be the 1 or 2 seed if they beat Georgia. They're the 2 seed if Oregon beats Penn State. If Penn State upsets Oregon, Texas would be the 1 seed in the scenario where they win the SEC championship game. So that's the easy one. After that, it gets a little more difficult. Now, not in this instance. Texas is going to host a first-round game. I think that's locked up by beating A&M and getting to the SEC championship game. Because even if Georgia nips you again, you're 11-2, and you're going to be a host team. The question is, are you the number 5 or number 6 in a scenario like that? Because where you want to be in this bracket, CJ, is you want to be number 5.
I agree.
Because number 5, the way I think it's going to line up is 5, you're going to play 12. So that could be Boise State, or that could be Arizona State or Iowa State. And then you're going to come back if you win that game, and you're going to play the 4, which is probably going to be
the opposite,
Boise State or the Big 12 champion. In that, you want to be the 5 seed. You either want to be 1 or 5. And 5 looks really good for getting to a national semifinal to me. Now, again, we'll see how that all plays out. But if you look at Ohio State as the 5. You think that's not the draw you want? If Texas is the 5 and you get Arizona State, check. You'll want that. They're a good team. Quarterback's a good player. Scatterbo, you gotta bring it against him. But defensively, I think they have issues with Texas. If you win that game at home in Austin, by the way, then you take on Boise State. I mean, you can't ask for a better draw than that. And then you take your chances into a semifinal game. You flip that thing around, though, and look at if you're the 2 seed. Great to win the conference championship, CJ, but then you're going to turn around and play Notre Dame, and you don't know where that game's going to be, right? Or
right.
if you're not going to be the 3, if you win it, you're going to be the 1 or 2. Obviously, if you win it and you're the 1, that gets into some difficult stuff, because then you're talking about a potential Tennessee-Ohio State game in round 1, and you're getting into the danger zone in round 2. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, CJ. I think it's pretty obvious, though, to most Texas fans who followed this, if you aren't 1 or 2, you want to be 5 in this playoff scenario, the way things are shaking out.
I think you're absolutely right. And it should shake out that way, where if Texas loses in the SEC championship game, the 5 spot would be available for them. Of course, having an 11-1 regular season playing for the SEC title, that would probably trump that of a 10-2 Tennessee, who's sitting right on the outside at number 9. This was, of course, last week's playoff bracket projection, but I would believe that 5 spot would be there for the taking for the Longhorns. I also don't hate the 6, because you're looking at the ACC champion right there, which could be SMU. Yep. I mean, look, there's 5 or 6 I don't think is a bad option.
No.
I know you want to bring home some hardware. You want to have the bragging rights, but long-term, 5, 6, it's not a bad spot to be. 1, maybe you get caught with another SEC opponent right off the bat. Now they'll have to have played a game immediately, and you'll have a bye, which means you'll have to battle the rust versus rest conversation, which we hear all the time in the NFL. That'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out in year 1 of the college football playoff. How do you keep your guys ready to go? Because over the break, I was speaking with a couple folks who have played football at the highest level, and they're sitting there saying, we don't want buys. We don't want that time off. Why? Why not? You want to rest, right? Well, because it starts to linger on you. It starts to wear on you mentally. While you go out there and watch folks on Friday and Saturday night play their playoff games, you're sitting there wondering when you'll be back on the field. And that starts to get to you a little bit. So I know that Sark's been good at battling and handling the 2 buys this season. Sometimes playing that extra game for the psyche of the team, it helps in my eyes.
Yeah. So let's go through that if Texas was a 6. Here's how I think Texas would end up a 6. Now, this is a scenario if Texas lost to Georgia in the SEC championship. The way I could see Texas bumping from 5 to 6 is if Notre Dame is the 5. And Notre Dame is going to be sitting there at 11-1, and you would be sitting there at 11-2. So do they give Notre Dame the 5? It could happen. Then Texas bumps to a 6 in that scenario. But you would you have no problem hosting Indiana in a scenario like that. Now, where it gets crazy, what if South Carolina is that 11? That's where the game changes a little bit. That's why I still think you want to be the 5 over the 6. Because if you're the 6, man, hey, look, we're hosting a good game. We're hosting, yep. Oh, that Lenore Sellers guy, and there's pass rushers are coming to town. This 6-11 game suddenly got a little different. Obviously, 5 is your number 1. Your goal is to win a conference championship and let the chips fall where they may after that, right? But if you don't, that's the value in 5 over 6. I don't, CJ, and I could be wrong, I don't think South Carolina is going to be a 12 if they get in. Maybe they are, but I still think that 5, that 4-12 is going to be either your Big 12 champion or Boise, and it's going to be flipped. And I could be wrong on that, because South Carolina, if they get in, is a 3-loss team, and maybe it's as simple as that. If South Carolina is in this playoff, you don't want to be the other side of who you don't want to host them in round 1 if it's me. So if they're the 11, you're favored. You're the 6. You'll play the game, but you'd rather not play Lenore Sellers in South Carolina right now because they're playing at a really high level.
Totally agree. And again, it'll shake out the way it may, but right now, Texas, Georgia going to Atlanta December 7th. SEC title on the line, Gerry. Tough to beat a team twice, and of course, first seed up for grabs, second seed up for grabs, a bye at play this weekend in Atlanta.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And let's see what happens. I think that this is going to be such an interesting game because Texas isn't going to get the same Georgia, and Georgia's not going to get the same Texas. The only scenario for me where it's similar is Quinn Ewers isn't healthy again for this game. So that's twice this year that Georgia's going to go up against Quinn Ewers, and he's not going to be 100%. And that does favor Georgia in this scenario.
It absolutely does.
Passer. That's the key right there. Is they haven't had to face a healthy Quinn Ewers yet this season. All right, for CJ Vogel, I'm Gerry Hamilton. Thanks for joining in today on this Texas versus Georgia Part 2. We'll be breaking it down all week. CJ and Bobby will be in Atlanta. I may be. I'm going to make that call tomorrow. We'll see. We got signing day Wednesday. We got a lot going on. So we shall see on that. But thanks for joining in, Texas fans. Congrats on the win over Texas A&M. Congrats on, at worst, hosting a first round in the college football playoff, but now you're playing for more. You're playing for an SEC championship and the possibility of being the 1 seed, depending on what happens with Penn State and Oregon. All right, guys, hook 'em. Thanks for joining in.